Good afternoon. This is Dr. Kentress Davison with Dr. Hood, LLC. And today we having another open discussion. On our panel, we have Miss Cook. She is a regulatory manager at the site level at a academic or academia facility. And then we have Miss Stevens. She's going to be representing the site level from a study coordinator perspective. And our topic is work and documentation integrity. So we understand from a regulatory standpoint or a GCP standpoint, we want to make sure our work and our documentation shows our work ethic, and we hope that that expresses strong integrity. When CRAs monitors come to the site or an auditor comes to the site, they're looking for the accuracy in documentation. They're looking for when corrections are made that the person who did the corrections have initial and dated the correction. They're looking for if things have been documented late, that they are marked as late entry with initials and date. And so we want to make sure that our documentation is transparent, so we don't compromise the data quality when conducting clinical research. So I'm going to let our two panelists introduce themselves. First, Ms. Cook.
Hi, I'm Felice Cook. I am manager of clinical research regulations at like you said, academia institution.
Okay.
And I have been doing clinical research sorry about that, got kids in the background, but I've been doing clinical research for over 20 years. And I've been in regulatory, probably 18, well, really 20 of, 22, 23 years of doing research. So I've never been a study coordinator. I have pretty much, it's been regulatory, um, pretty much the entire time. I feel like I've seen all different levels of regulatory just because, I've worked with, we're a shared service group within the institution. So we work with, a variety of different departments and divisions. And so you see all, you just see a broad range of clinical research, in that setting of, from emergency medicine to, all the way to, orthopedic. So it's definitely a variety of how that research, changes depending on that therapeutic area and just getting, acclimated with all of that. But I love, doing what I do.
Hey, Ms. Stevens, introduce yourself.
Okay, I'm sorry. The kids got back right when we get started, so excuse my background. But yes, my name is Adrena Stevens, and I was a clinical research coordinator or lead clinical research coordinator, level two, at an academia as well. And so I was there for what I've been doing this almost 6 years now, and I enjoyed my position there. I was mainly doing like observational, or more of a I would say level or phase four research study, because I only had the opportunity to really just have my hands on in two. And so they were mostly nutrition focused research. So I feel like I'm still like starting out and learning a lot of things and getting an understanding what all clinical research is all about, because again, I just only had just pretty much, I feel like surface level experience. I mean, I did documentation and things, but Dr. Hood, listening to you talk about this, I just realized how much um, or not as much as I guess documentation, because we kind of really just did our own thing as far as like how we documented things. And honestly, I was discouraged from my coworkers from doing that, like just having my own personal documentation so I could keep up with who I'm dealing with, what I'm working with, what we all have going on, versus just like one central area where we was trying to document everything that was going on. I just feel like, and honestly, they did listen to me before I took a break from that last position I had, because they realized, that we need to have more paper documentation versus just focusing on one central place to put every data
Mm-hmm.
information that we're inputting. So um,
Mm-hmm.
listen to me on that end. But like I said, I'm still learning. So that's why I'm a part of this conversation. So I could get more in-depth knowledge. So I could bring that with me into my next position.
Okay,
And
so
that's
the agenda, we done our introductions. We're gonna do a quick icebreaker. Then I got three topics lined up about work and integrity, and then three topics lined up for documentation integrity. So, okay, so we introduced ourselves. So this is the icebreaker. Say your middle name and whether you wish it was your first name or not a part of your name at all. So my middle name is Yvette. I am Kentress Yvette Langford was my maiden name, and my dad's name is Kenneth Errol Langford. And so his grandma, well, his mother, my grandmother, assisted my mom in naming a lot of us. And so I am the only girl that has the KEL initials. All the boys have KEL, and it's three of them. And I'm the only girl that have KEL. And I was also born in June, and my dad's birthday is June the 8th. So I guess that's why they took it upon themselves to make me a KEL as well.
awesome.
So my middle name is Yvonne. Some people pronounce it Yvonne, but I pronounce it as Yvonne. And I like my, I mean, I don't have any objections. I
Okay.
don't, yeah, my mom's, her, older sister, she named me. So, um, yeah, so she gave me that name and yeah, I have no objections here. And I like my first name too. So
Yeah. Yeah, you are the first Felice that I know. So I liked your name when we first met. Okay.
thank
Miss
you.
Miss Stevens.
Okay, yes. My middle name is Chantel. So Uh, from my understanding, I'm not sure where that middle name really came from, but I'm like you, I guess almost a daddy's girl, Dr. Hood. So pretty much my dad was like, he was very vocal with naming me and my sister. Like it was gonna be his way, and not to say this pleasure to my mom, but he was very vocal with naming us. So
So he gave you
uh
your first and middle name?
yes, definitely.
Okay.
And actually, what he said not to tell my mom, which is clearly in his yearbook, he got my name, Adrena, my first name, from a classmate
Girl,
from me.
is it a girl he liked?
I know, right? I was like, I looked, I said, "Yeah, she was pretty." So, but I thought it was strange. 'Cause I'm like, my mom see his yearbook, so anyway. So I just thought that was weird. But I immediately when I went through it for the first time years ago, I was like, oh, this is my. And then that's when he told me the story. I'm like, okay. And then I met her, and we have two different personalities, so I can't say
So it
that.
wasn't because you reminded her of him.
No, not it couldn't be because she was kind of mean. So anyway,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, so the first topic, and the reason why I brought this work integrity up is because in clinical research, things are never the same, and sometimes you might leave abruptly, or you might get another opportunity, and you have to, hand over your sites or your workload to the person who's gonna come after you, and you want to make sure that you have this attitude that I take pride in my work, or I have that integrity, and I want to make sure that I don't give them anything, but I give them the opportunity to start where I stopped, and everything can just run smoothly. So that's why I wanted to talk about work integrity in clinical research. So the first topic is about working to maintain audit readiness. So from a regulatory standpoint, what do you think that means, Miss Cook?
Um, well, again, with the being audit ready, the FDA, they could come in, especially if it's an FDA regulated study. They could come in, at any time. So you want to make sure that, your documentation, everything is complete. So you want to make sure, we're trying to do internal audits, at our institution. So within, our group, but it goes back to having those internal audits, checking to make sure your source docs are complete and, um, that if you have monitors coming out, that you've, pretty much are making sure you're addressing, the queries that the monitors are leaving, whether if it's from a regulatory standpoint or, on the source side of things. Just, making sure, all of your reg tests are done. Your, emails, GCP, FDA, everything is filed. Everything is, yeah, it's filed and complete. Like I said, those internal QAs, those, just checks, making sure that they're happening continuously. Just even doing self reviews, but then, not even waiting for your, an internal audit to happen. Just you as the person that's owning, that study, that's, doing the coordination for that study and also the regulatory for that study. Just making sure that your stuff is, up to par, complete, accurate, and, and just ready for, if anybody come in, sponsor
Hmm.
audit, and it didn't have to be an FDA, just any audit, just making sure
Or the
that, all
IRB inspection. Hmm.
right, right, right.
Ms. Stevens, seeing that you said you did mostly observational studies, and you feel like you didn't, just scratch the surface of being a study coordinator. Did you all have conversations about being audit ready, or experience undergoing an audit?
Okay, yes, I never had the experience of undergoing an audit or really being prepared, but yes, I we when I was trained, I did had that conversation a lot with my coworkers about, making sure that we do our documentation right, in case we become audited. And I think mainly the only thing that I was understanding, from my perspective of the work we did is that, especially when it became the work with the consent of the regulatory documents that you're speaking of, I was learning, I was like, one of the issues was confusion about just dates when it comes to when you're consenting participants and working with them. And then when you're working with a different unit, maybe I guess IRB are related. Documentation as well, that all the dates need to be aligned and stuff like that, specifically when you're dealing with participants and the procedures that will be done with them that day, or certain procedures. So anyway, so long story short, I just remember just being drilled about dates. But honestly, as far as anything else, we're using heavily computer and data management, and input through those systems that we have. So I mean, I feel like I was okay there, making sure like whatever was going on with patient, and whatever information that we're collecting, that documentation. That's when I made sure I had my own and the system we was using to input. But it was just like those little fine things that I wasn't familiar with. When in case that we were to be audited, so I never had that experience. So.
So I'm gonna speak to you like what CRA is supposed to prepare the sites for, so just in case you get audited, or some things that auditors always find. So the first thing I try to tell my sites that auditor is going to go to is that informed consent. And so we want to make sure, this is why typically when you're running a pharmaceutical trial, they want that CRA on site within a specific number of days from that first randomized patient, because we want to make sure we minimize the amount of errors or protocol deviations as possible. And we have a lot of surprisingly, informed consent issues. Okay, so sometimes, even though it's administrative, but sometimes the site or the participant does not follow the date format. So that's not a deviation. That's just something to correct them on. So that's nothing that has to be reported to the IRB. But we're still having situations where assessments are done before the ISF is obtained, or there is poor documentation of the ISF process. So even though the participant might sign in the right place, the person conducting the informed consent signs in the right place, we still have to make sure we document the process. So we still have to make sure there's documentation that the patient had ample amount of time to read the consent. The patient had the opportunity to ask questions and they were answered. The patient was not coerced into signing the informed consent form. The patient was given a signed copy of the informed consent, and then you document that process. If something is out, I've seen where a person has indicated that they completed the informed consent process on that checklist, but they didn't sign the actual consent form until days later. That's a no-no. If you are the person conducting an informed consent process, you need to be the person who signs that informed consent, and it needs to be done that same day. Also, another thing we need to make sure that we document is the time. So I learned that from a quality check that a pharmaceutical company did after I was a study coordinator, probably about 4 or 5 years in. But he made a valid point. He said, "Well, why don't y'all document the time?" And I was like, well, this template was made before I got here. It was what we always used. And he said, well, technically, I can't really verify that the assessments have happened after the informed consent because you don't have the time. So then we start adding the time to our documentation and checklist. So I do know, again, that is one thing they check for. Another thing they check for is training. Training has always been an issue a lot of times in audit findings. And it's because we have delegation logs where there's a lot of people on the delegation log. And sometimes it's not even a lot. But the site only kind of, your mind is programmed to only make sure that those primary people have completed training, and you forget about that backup coordinator or that backup data person or that backup lab person. And so as a protocol amendments come, everybody that's applicable on that delegation law should have adequate training. Now, I was under the impression that every time a amendment happens, that the longest the PI and the primary coordinator has completed training, then that is when you can consider that that document has been implemented. Now, every other person that's on the delegation law should also complete training, and they technically should stop working on the study until that training is complete. But some sponsors give them a window. So they'll say, well, after this document has been IRB approved, then you have 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks to make sure everybody has that training. I'm going to continue to tell my sites to start working until you have completed training once that new document has been implemented. Now, what I love about my sites, they collectively do the training. So I don't know if they're doing it at their regular meetings, they're just having training sessions, but they collectively do the training. They document on one training log, and then everybody signs, whether that's wet ink or electronic. Another thing that I learned that was not FDA regulated, but sponsors prefer, is CVs actually do not have to be signed and dated. So we know typically the sponsors want a new CV every 2 years, or if a major change has happened, for that CV to be updated. But I was about to create an issue for a site because there was a lapse in CV documentation. It was probably about 4 weeks. And before this regulatory person came on, the previous regulatory person was not. She didn't object to. I was like, well, just in case the auditor comes, let us say we identified it before the auditor said they identified it. Let's just create a note to file and just say PI acknowledged that this person's CV expired on this date and was renewed on this date. But she's like, well, we don't have to do a note to file because it's not an FDA regulated document. And when I Googled it, she was absolutely right. So you always learn something all the time. But training, lapse in training is a big audit finding. So as from a regulatory standpoint, if you're maintaining that ISF, the investigator site file, you want to set some type of alerts to show you when a person's CV or GCP or IATA is about to expire and kind of give them a heads up. As a monitor, what I do from the start is when I get my delegation log, I list everybody on the chart. I list if they're licensed, I list their medical license expiration date. I list when they signed the CV, giving myself 2 years from that, saying that's when it's going to expire. Same with GCP. And same with IATA. And when they get to that 60 day mark, I change the color from the chart is, background is white, but I change it to orange and I let them know, hey, this is expiring soon. Then when I have my next visit, it's expiring soon. So they get that ahead of time. So even though it's not necessarily the CRA's responsibility, I would prefer to remind them ahead of time versus them getting a lapse in documentation. So that's what we mean by staying audit ready. Just making sure our dates line up. We keeping up with our training. We don't have pages missing for the clears. We want to make sure that we get our labs reaccredited. We want to make sure our calibration logs are up to date. So those are the things that we hope that are being taking place at those interim monitoring visits to maintain compliance and make sure your site is audit ready. So this leads us to our second topic, knowing which aspects of the protocol you do not understand and how to get the answers. So from a regulatory standpoint, this doesn't necessarily apply to the regulatory side because the regulatory team is not required to review the protocol, although at some sites SOP, their standard operating practices, but so you don't really have to do the protocol. But from Ms. Stevens, from your aspects as a study coordinator, what do you or how did you handle reading a section of the protocol and you didn't understand it? Like, who did you go to? Did you go straight to a monitor? Did you go to a colleague, or did you go to the PI? Who was your go-to person if there was an aspect of the protocol you didn't understand?
Okay, yes, ma'am. From the two studies I did, the last study recently, when those protocols there was questions, I would reach out to one of the lead biostatistician at the lead site that we was working with, since this was a multi-site study. So I
Okay.
reached out to him and he was very helpful. Any questions we asked or I asked, he would immediately, clarify. So, and I mean, sometimes we would go to the PI, but since again this was a multi-site study, we were all learning. So
So that's
yeah.
good. And
Hmm.
that's the best thing to do. It's best to and then sometimes it can be intimidating, especially if you're new
Yes.
to a team or you feel like you don't have the same credentials as your colleagues. You don't want to seem like you are not adequate enough to do the job. But trust me, patient safety is always number one. So if you stepping aside and coming out your comfort zone and asking that question is going to prevent a protocol deviation or it's going to prevent a safety issue, it's always best to ask. Now, from a regulatory standpoint, when we do create those deviations and they meet a promptly reportable criteria and they need to be reported to the IRB, how would you process that, Ms. Cook?
Um, well, I typically look at who the reviewing IRB is, look at their reporting guidelines, how soon it needs to be reported, and work with the coordinator to get all of the information to get it submitted to the IRB as soon as possible.
And so different IRBs have their different criterias. Some IRBs do not want protocol deviations or safety, serious adverse events, unless they are related to the investigational product, and some want everything. So those criterias that Ms. Cook was referring to, they will be listed in the IRB handbook. So it's always good to have that copy on hand. And not every study uses the same IRB. IRB. So you have to get acclimated to what this IRB want versus what another IRB wants. But it's always great documentation to document it at the site level. And when a protocol deviation or a properly reportable criteria has been met and has been reported to the IRB, not only do you want to make sure that submission is saved in the ISF, you want to make sure that the acknowledgement. So when the IRB replies and say, okay, we've got the information, it's safe to continue, we got the information, you all need a halt enrollment, whatever their response is, it needs to be saved in the ISF as well. And it also needs to be given to the monitor so they can file it in the TMF. So because you'll get a QI in your TMF system, and again, that's from the CRO standpoint. Monitors will get a query if they have filed the submission, but they did not file the IRB response. So it's important that we understand it. So from our standpoint, it's aspects of the protocol that you all may ask, the site team may ask us that we might not be familiar with. So we can go to other CRAs or we can go to the role that's above us. And depending on the CRO that you work for, that person's title is either called a clinical trial manager or a clinical operations leader. So it just depends on your organization. And then it even might be a different name. But those are the two titles that I'm familiar with. And we usually have them grouped by region. So they have their own specific sites and monitors that they're responsible for. And then they work collectively. So that's who we go to if we don't have a good understanding. We also have especially if it's related to like a medical history question or a serious adverse event question or a prohibited med question, you also can go to your medical monitors. So each I don't know if every study, but big pharmaceutical studies, they're gonna have that medical monitor team. And that team can be part of the CRO or it can be part of the sponsor, or sometimes you have a medical monitor that works collectively on both aspects. And then it's just a chain of command of who you will go to first. Typically, if you have both, if you have a medical monitor from the sponsor level and the CRO level, typically you go to the CRO first. And then if they can't figure it out, they will go to the sponsor level. But it's very important that following the protocol is done. Now, there's no waiver from following not following the protocol, but in the event of a patient's safety, sponsors depend on the expertise of the principal investigator to make that call. So let's just say the investigational product, the patient had an allergic reaction to, but they're supposed to take the medication daily. The sponsor does not expect the PI to continue to force that patient to take that medicine if they have a known reaction. So that medication can be halted. Now, if it is a study that has a titration aspect, that means they can increase or decrease the dosages, then they can consult with the medical monitor and see if we could increase, if we should decrease the dosage or if we should stop it altogether. So they are deviating from the protocol, but it is for patient safety. On the flip side, if the patient had a reaction because too much medicine was given to them or they took it incorrectly, then that is considered a medication error, and that has to be reported to the IRB. So whether the patient had a reaction or not, if the patient was supposed to get 200 milligrams daily and they were getting 400 milligrams daily, that needs to be reported to the IRB because that is a potential safety issue and that is a medication error. Does everybody understand that? And that needs to be completely documented. We need to have, again, that integrity that we documented. And I've told this story before. I myself completed a medication error. when I was a study coordinator, and I just thank God above that that drug was all placebo, and it was known per protocol that it was placebo. So we wasn't supposed to tell the patient that, but a lot of diabetes studies, and I worked primarily with diabetes research when I was a coordinator. We had what was called a run-in period, and so the run-in period is a time frame. It's usually between 2 to 4 weeks. Is where the patient is taking assigned the medication like they supposed to take it. So if that's twice a day, once a day, every day, however it is. But the purpose of this quote unquote running period is to see if the patient is going to be compliant throughout the main study. So usually the compliance percentage is set at 80%. So as long as they've taken the medication at least 80% of the time, they can be randomized in the study. I don't even know how I did it, but the numbers were in order, starting with 50, I think, all the way to 60. It was like 10050, 10051, on down to 60. And then there was a that was like the main medication. And then it was some a different dosage that was like started at 0. So however it was, I picked up the bottle that ended with 15 and it should have been 51, or vice versa. I inverted the last two numbers and I gave that person the pill bottle. So and I didn't know it until they returned it. So they was taking this drug for 4 weeks. And they returned the drug, and I did the count, and then I looked at my source document, and I was like, okay, dispense drug in with 15, and this bottle said 51, or again, vice versa, whichever one it was. I can't remember. I just know I inverted the last two numbers. And I was like, oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no. I gave them the wrong kit. Then I was like, then I guess it was like a tap on the shoulder. Calm down, they all placebo. So we still had to report it to the RB. I still had to face the music and tell my PI at the time. And we wrote it up and we submitted it. And then they, I also had to go into the IRT system and do what's called a data correction form. So we had to re-put the bottle that the patient actually used as used. So that had to be changed to as if it was dispensed. And the one that I didn't grab, we had to put that back into the inventory. So it was a lot of cleanup. But, again, with that work ethic, if I was trying to hide it, I could have just tried to change the numbers, but that wouldn't work because the numbers come from the IRT system. So it's never good to try to clean up or cover up, I should say, a mistake. You have to be transparent because a patient safety is on the line. And
Amen.
and that any comments before we go to the third topic? Any comments on that about knowing the protocol, about knowing who to go to if you don't know it, preventing protocol deviations?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I said amen. I definitely agree with you on that. Because I was like almost in a situation where no, this was it wasn't medication or anything like that, but it was just involving a participant wanting to be in our research study really, really bad, and she wanted me to not tell the truth about her weight.
Mm-hmm.
And I contemplated, don't get me wrong, I contemplated, but like you said, I'm like, no, I want my integrity, my work ethics, all
Mm-hmm.
that. I can't put that on the line just for this one participant that really wanted to be in the study. And then I kept
Mm-hmm.
thinking of, like you said, there is always a trace pattern that's
It's
going to lead
always.
that to her, or me negliging her real weight being in the
Mm-hmm.
input in the data. I was like, it's going to come back. And
And
eventually,
let's
I
and
mean,
let's just say this. I mean to cut you off, but let's just say the study you were doing the medication was based on the weight the person was, and if you said she was too low or too low or too high, then she wouldn't be getting the correct dosage. And again, you are running a safety
right.
risk of safety. So you did the right thing. You did the right
Thank you.
thing.
Thank you.
Okay. And then the last thing we're going to talk about with work integrity is never throw your colleague under the bus to stakeholders. the site staff, or a sponsor. And sometimes this is easier said than done because you get so frustrated. But you have to remember that you all should be working as a team. So, say for instance, a monitor has come and the study coordinator is ready, but the ISF is not. As her colleague or his colleague, you don't want to say, well, that was such and such job and they ain't do it, so tear the PI on them. No, you don't. That's not how you want to approach the situation. You want to say, okay, well, what documents are missing or what is it that you need, and we'll make sure we get you the necessary things. You don't want to point out whose responsibility it was, because 9 times out of 10, if they got the delegation law, they know. So it is, you don't have to be the one to remind them. Just ask them, or I can bring the regulatory coordinator in and I'll let them talk to you, or vice versa. If you have, because this happens a lot. Sometimes you have study coordinators, but they're not the lab people. They don't do the drawing of the blood. You send them either to a central lab or you have your own lab technician. And sometimes the lab technician has so many protocols in mind. They didn't put enough dry ice on a specimen, so it came to the lab, got to the central lab ambient, so it was no longer frozen. They didn't process it, or it should have been ambient, for whatever reason they sent it on cold packs, and so now your site has a deviation. If the visit is still within window, you can bring that participant back for a repeat, but now you got to pay and have time for an unscheduled visit. And if they don't yield a result, like the patient is not willing to come back or you've outside of the visit window, you're going to get a protocol deviation. So when we document the protocol deviations, we don't have to say lab technician Sarah did not do blah 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 blah. That's not how we want to document deviations. We just want to say that the lab received participants XYZ on February the 21st ambient when it should have been frozen. That's it. And then for action, we can say CRA retrain um, applicable staff on this protocol procedure. That's it. We don't want to embarrass anybody. We don't want anybody to feel bad, but we do need to do re-education, and that re-education can either come from the CRA, it can come from the manager, or it can come from the principal investigator. But we need to re-educate them, and we need to document that re-education. So, Ms. Cook, why do you think it's important not to throw your colleagues under the bus to outside um, stakeholders?
I mean, I definitely feel like, you should always be a united front with your team. So,
Mm-hmm.
the sponsor, or, CRO or whatever stakeholders you're working with, they should always see you as united and, um, just showing that you're a true team, because I'm
Mm-hmm.
very, for me, I'm very protective of my team. So even if they do make a mistake, because we're all human, we all make
Exactly.
mistakes. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna I always tell them, like, I'm gonna have your back regardless,
Mm-hmm.
to that external stakeholder. Now, internally, we're gonna get together. We're going to,
Handle it.
handle it, figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I always tell them, like, you never have to worry about me not having your back. Because that builds trust. You want your team
Mm-hmm.
to trust you. And
Exactly.
so so I always, try to, just encourage them to be honest. If you do make a mistake or if you feel like there may be an issue, come to me, let me know, give me the heads up so we can work on getting this resolved, and that way we're going to them, we're coming to them with a solution. This is what happened, but this is what we've done to correct the issue, and I just try to, move in that direction of it.
And that's good because when they feel that they can trust you, their morale is increased. if they feel like, they don't have the confidence to go to leadership for help or acknowledge that they made a mistake, they will do a lot of hiding, and that hiding builds up. And it's going to eventually come to the surface. But you want to, what's the word I'm looking for? Prevent that disaster before it happens.
Right.
Um,
Like you said, like you had made a good point when you were like, let's just say a monitor was coming to the site to monitor, and let's say they were getting ready to do the regulatory part, and the regulatory binder, wasn't available. Instead of throwing that colleague under the bus, they could, you just kind of get to the root of it, or reach out and, have a monitor here and
mhm.
somebody else can, you just kind of work through it internally without making it seem like to that external partner that that person is messed up, or that person didn't do what they were supposed to do, or you definitely, I'm all about team, and having that united front there.
Especially if it's something that only requires you to print it. So let's just say the
Right.
binder was there and the PI's medical license was not in the binder, but you have it. Y'all have access to a shared drive. It's on the shared drive and just require printing. That'll take you 2 minutes. It's best to you just say, "Oh, I can get that for you," because they might be tied
Right.
up. Print that hole punch, put it in the binder, and let that be it.
Right.
Because
And that's
again,
teamwork.
exactly. Because again, what you want to understand is when you're on a study, and I'm speaking from a CRA standpoint, when you're
Mhm.
on a study, a lot of times when it's time to do a new study, we're asked, what sites would you recommend to do this site? This new study, I'm sorry. Well, do you got any good sites in mind? That they were very responsive, they worked as a team, they had low protocol deviation, they had good enrollment, whatever they're looking for. And
Right.
we have the opportunity now. That does not mean that they always pick the sites that we suggest, or they don't pick the sites that we don't suggest, but we do have that ear to the sites a little closer than the sponsor does, and then we can make suggestions. And so
Right.
if we see teamwork, if we see people working together, I love sites that try to close issues before I leave. Oh,
Right.
I love those. And so what I typically do in my confirmation letter is I provide a window for my 5 to 10 minute discussion with the PI to kind of get a summary of what is going on or what I found. I put that in my confirmation letter, but my sites know that, hey, at 3 o'clock, we gonna sit down, we gonna talk to each other face to face, and we gonna go over what I found. They also get so the documentation that I have for myself to get ready to write my reports, my sites has that as well. So I create a chart, I number it based on the participant's name. One column is set for ISF review. One column is set for the visits that I review. One column is set for any PDs I found or any adverse events that they need to follow up with the patient because it's been greater than 30 days and they're still open. And one column is set for labs. So I say when the lab report was received by the site and when the PI has signed them. And what I'm looking for is to make sure the PI are signing labs within 7 days, or whatever good GCP is. 7 to 10 calendar days is good GCP. They have documentation of the PD, so not only do they have it on my chart, it's going to also come to them officially in the follow-up letter. If there is any queries I place in the EDC because their original source does not match EDC, not only do they have that query in the EDC system, but they also have it on my chart. And my sites typically are very responsive to this process because they don't have to wait the 14 days or how long it takes them to get their follow-up letter. They know the issues that I found already. So sometimes they can go ahead and fix them before I even have to create an issue in my report. Now I still mention what I found in the comment section, So if I found, a trend, or this patient was missing that, or that patient was missing that, I'm going to still put it in my comment section, but I don't have to create a visit issue. And so whatever system works between the site and that CRA and that monitor, they need to come up with a system that works best to minimize unnecessary issues. Another thing we want to do when we talk about not throwing colleagues on the bus, under the bus, let's make sure that you do your part. So if this is a team effort, um, study coordinator, if your job is to recruit. Your job is to do the labs, do the labs. We want to make sure that everybody's playing their role, which they have been assigned to from the delegation log. And that it concludes the work integrity aspect. And we're just going to quickly go through documentation because we kind of hit some of the documentation topics by talking about work integrity, but we just going to talk about these things because not everybody know when to do them. Okay, so Miss Stevens, I don't know if you had to do a lot of note to files or if you all had your regular team person to do note to files, but I know once we do a note to file, they are filed in the ISF, and then the CRA should collect and file them in the TMF at when they do their interim monitoring visits. So when is a note to file? Hold on. When a note to file is not the answer. Okay, just for to say I phrased that question wrong, but I know I was just reading it wrong. So when is a note to file is not the answer?
Okay, Dr. Hood, I'm sorry. Or Dr. Davidson. I keep
You
calling you
fine.
Dr. Hood. I'm
Either
sorry.
one. I knew who you was talking to.
I'm sorry. Okay, so yeah, what is a note to file? And I've been asked that before. We never had that or had that discussion. I don't know. I've never been trained on this. So what
Okay,
is
good.
it?
So you're in the right place. Okay, so a note to file is basically you take is like if you was documenting on a patient, we'll call it a progress note. If you was documenting like the what had happened, you'll say progress note or comment. So when you create your source, you'll have some few lines that might say comment or progress note, and you kind of give a summary of what happened in that visit. A note to file is kind of basically a progress note outside of the participants section or as you may have it, and it explains what went wrong. So let me give an example of when a note to file is the answer, and then we'll answer the question that's on the prompt. Okay, so say for instance, okay, I found I noticed this trend. There was a situation. Are we just gonna say that this happened? Let's do let's do the informed consent process. So let's just say we had a person on the delegation law that was a research assistant, but recently got promoted to a study coordinator. She or he has completed their GCP, their IRB training, their CV is up to date, and they've been trained on the protocol. Fast forward, the monitor comes in 4 weeks after this promotion has taken place and notice that this person was not updated on the delegation law to be a study coordinator. And this person now has started completing the informed consent process but was not delegated to do so. The site needs to document why this happened. And the document that they do this in is just basically a letterhead with the date, the protocol, the PI, the site number, and then you'll usually in the center you'll have going across that says note to file, and then you explain how that happened, and that is what's called a note to file. So it's basically when there has been a hiccup or a mistake that was made, you document that mistake in what is called a note to file. Another, oftentimes, what we have when we were speaking about that lapse of training, we have some people that's on the delegation log. They remembered to do Protocol Amendment 1 training. Now we had 2. They forgot to do it or document that they did it. And now we're on Protocol Amendment 3. So now we have what's called that lapse and documentation. They were on the delegation log the whole time, so they should have been trained on Protocol Amendment 1, 2, and 3. So now you need to do, quote unquote, a note to file to explain why documentation of Protocol Amendment 2 was not done. So those are some examples of when to use note to file. But sometimes we have new CRAs or new site staffs, and they do note to files for things that are not necessary. For example, the site created a header for the subject ID. And let's say the subject ID starts with let's do a country. Let's do the country Congo. So the first 3 letters of the subject ID is CON, and then they have a series of numbers. And for whatever reason, when they created their header for their source documentation, they left off CON, but they have but their site number is 015. So they put 015 showing that that's the site ID. But technically, that's not the full site ID, because the full site ID should be CON 015. Me personally, as a CRA, that's correctable. They can take their pen, they can write in CON in that section, write late entry, what we'll talk about in number 2. They can write late entry and they can initial a date. But depending on the CRA, they might say, create a note to file and tell me why this happened. In my humble opinion, that note to file is not necessary. And when you create a lot of note to files for minimal things, you also alert, if you've had an audit, you also alert the auditor as well that this site might have a quality issue. So you got to be very careful with your note to files. If things can be corrected, and again, it's not posing a patient safety issue. If it's just a transcription issue and it can be corrected with the late entry, I would prefer the site corrected and just do late entry. I don't think that a note to file is necessary in that state. Another um and so late entry is not document correctly. So what does this mean? So are you familiar with late entry, Ms. Stevens?
I'm sorry, what was your very last question?
Are you familiar with the late entry is?
I I can, yeah, I mean, I have those issues, but not like as a formal situation. So yes, ma'am.
Okay, so this is the correct way to document a late entry. Say, for instance, the PI created a physical exam, and you can clearly see his or her handwriting on the checklist for pulmonary, eyes, skin, cardiovascular, neurological. You can clearly see they're writing in comments, they're indicating whether or not it's clinically significant or not. They got the date at the top of the page. You can see what the participant is, you can see what visit is associated with. But for whatever reason, that very last portion of the that physical exam, they forgot to initial and date, or if it says signature, they forgot to put their signature and date. You as me as the monitor comes in, it's 4 weeks later, and you flag it with a sticky note, and you say, now you don't have this problem if they have electronic documentation. So that's one plus I love about electronic documentation. It's going to put the initials of the person who put the information in. So that is their signing it and dating because it's going to timestamp it. But when you got that paper charting, you have to make sure that you don't leave any fields blank. So as a CRA, I will come and say, hey, you need to sign this physical exam, but you need to do it as a late entry. So some people might hear me say you need to sign this physical exam, and they will put the date of when they did it, but they can't do that. That's not proper documentation. Even though, based on the date of the physical exam, based on the date of the visit, we can conclude that you did this on February 1st, but you didn't sign on February 1st. So you need to sign. You need to sign today's date, which will be February 21st, and then you need to write late entry. And this lets me know that you are acknowledging that you are the person who conducted this physical exam, but you inadvertently forgot to sign at the time that it was done. So this is what I mean by when late entry is not documented correctly. It's when that person decides to put the date that they did it instead of the date that I'm telling them, hey, you need to do it today's date because you didn't sign it initially. Some people say, okay, and then they will count on you not verifying when they sign, and then they will put the date of when the event took place. That's not proper. And that's not transparent. That's not good GCP. Because if you know you didn't sign it, then you shouldn't put that date. You should put the date of which you're signing, and then you should mark it as late entry. And this is leads us to 3, because paper charting yields no audit trail. Should it be obsolete or currently? So this is just a general question. It's no right or wrong answer. But just using that situation about the late entry, if you have paper, you got the right late entry. If you have a computerized way of documentation, it's going to automatically stamp the person who's putting the information in, the time and date. So because research is evolving so much, should we get away from paper charting? What do you all think? Again, no right or wrong answer, just simply your opinion. Do you think paper charting is still relevant, still okay to do, or do you think we should go strictly electronic? And I guess you can say the whichever one you decide, you can provide the pros and I guess a possible con.
Well, from a regulatory perspective, we use Florence, the e-regulatory binder platform. It's cloud-based, HIPAA compliant, so I have been moving more toward electronic, but from a I mean, from like, I'm not a city coordinator, but I was just thinking, like, as a research coordinator, I mean, I feel like there's nothing really wrong with moving toward the electronic, aspect of it. I mean,
I
it
think
could
it is
actually help with
pricey.
audit. Hmm.
I think it is pricey. And I
It
think
is,
that's why
yeah, it
people,
is
yeah, and I think that's
pricey.
why
You're
people
right.
still stick with the paper because they can just print that. But
And they
but
provide audit trails. I feel like, a lot of the electronic, like, with Florence, like, we even though, like, we route things electronically, like, there's that audit trail there.
hmm
So you're right. There is the cost aspect of it, but there are some, some positives, some pros there, as well with having electronic, um, charting. So.
and then I guess the contract that the who owns the data is an issue too, because I think I've heard some sites say the system in which they're charting, that company owns that data and they'll hold it for so long, so many years, but the site will still have access to it. And then so I don't know if they own it or the site owns it once they have that contract. So that's one thing. And then it takes when you thinking about that long-term storage, if that electronic company goes out of business, will you have access to that information? If they get bought out, how would you make sure that you have access to the information? Or will at the end of the study, will you get the information on the iCloud, like a link or something you can download the
Yeah.
that you'll specifically have access to? So if a site does move to strictly electronic, that is definitely some questions that they need to make sure that they address. Um, One thing about, again, and this is about integrity with that paper, let's say for instance, because you mentioned earlier, Ms. Cook, if you did your own internal check before the monitor comes, if you notice that the PI has not signed something, you can tell them to go ahead and sign it. And and I'm sure this happens because the monitor is not here yet. They'll sign the date in which is going to keep them out of trouble. When you got that paper, when you have that paper documentation, you don't know if they really signed it on this date or they just put the date to avoid any issues. So that's some of the things you run into when you do paper.
Right.
But one thing that is a benefit of using paper, um when you comparing that EDC information to um um the original source, you sometimes I had instances where the original source in electronics was like completely off, or well, I guess it don't matter. It was completely off, and they was like, "Oh, we didn't mean to put that. That's wrong. We meant to put something else." So they did a progress. No, it was about a temperature. It's like it was real high, but they made a mistake. They was like, that patient didn't have a temp. I know that's wrong. I know it was this number instead of that number. And but when you have the electronic, like you quote unquote charted in real time, it's kind of hard to really say this what the number should be, because now you're going by what you remember versus what is on a piece of paper. So another thing about paper charting is monitors cannot really do remote visits. Only thing they can do possibly remotely, and that's if they have like a company that you mentioned, if they have electronic e-reg. But if their subjects are not in an electronic system, they would have to always go on site. And so now you have to calculate travel. So hopefully when assignments are being made, they make that balance between giving you assignments versus everybody's paper or versus everybody is computerized, but they kind of make it the workload balance so to keep you from having to travel to every site. Or you can alternate. You can travel 1 month or 6 months, and then the next visit you can do it remotely. And so having that remote aspect allows for I'm sorry, having that computerized documentation allows for remote visits.
Oh, but thank you for sharing that perspective because I didn't think of it that way as far as being easily accessible to a site manager or a CRA like yourself and others. Because again, I like I mentioned it before, I love paper documentation. So
Mhm.
paper charting, I'm all for because I'm just scared of technology. And there's been so many times where I'm as a coordinator, I'm conducting something and entering the data. Definitely with the last study, that's we're not owning this data system that we
Oh,
inputted in yet.
mhm.
So again, it's like what if something that we need to go back and we can't and access is their data. And I'm
Mhm.
so me, thank God, I write everything down so I could just go back to my notes.
We're gonna conclude this platform.